Cado here with another virtual art lesson. Before we get started, we're going to go on and do our quick stretch for the day to get our creative juices flowing. You're going to stretch to your left, stretch to your right, stretch up and down, up and down. One more big one, up and down. Give yourself a big hug, squeeze. Take a deep breath in and relax. Alright, so we're going on to lesson number 3, the elements of art. Enjoy! Lesson 3, Elements of Art. The objectives for this lesson are to learn about the elements of art, to identify lines, identify shapes, identify colors, identify texture, identify form, identify value, identify space, and to create artwork incorporating all of the elements of art. So what exactly are the elements of art? The elements of art are visual elements that are the building blocks of art pieces. The visual elements have a relationship to one another. Each of the elements may be also used individually to stress their own particular character in artwork. So if you look at the screen, you're going to see a diagram, and on the diagram you're going to see lines, you're going to see shapes, you're going to see colors, form, value, texture, and space. So over the next few slides, we're going to go more in depth into each of the elements. Before we begin going into each one individually, I'm going to go ahead and name them one more time. So the 7 elements of art, again, are line, shape, form, color, value, texture, and space. We're going to go ahead and watch this video.
The 7 elements of art are the basic pieces or properties of a work of art. The elements are line, color, shape, form, value, texture, and space. Line is the most basic element of art. Line is the path of a point moving across a surface. Lines in art express different meaning. Some artists show their lines more than others, and some artists use nothing but lines to express shapes, textures, value, space, and forms. Color is what we see because of reflected light. Light contains different wavelengths of energy that our eyes and brain see as different colors. Colors have 3 properties: hue, value, and intensity. Hue refers to the color name, red, blue, green, etc. Value refers to the lightness or darkness of the hue, dark green versus light green. Intensity refers to the purity of the color. Red is more intense than orange, and orange is more intense than yellow-orange, for example. A shape has 2 dimensions represented as an enclosed area. There are 2 types of shape. Geometric shapes are precise and regular, like squares, rectangles, and triangles. Organic shapes are irregular and typically come from nature, such as leaves, flowers, and clouds, shapes that grow, flow, and move. Form has 3 dimensions, represented as enclosed volume. Forms are shapes in 3 dimensions, such as a cube, sphere, pyramid, and cylinder. Organic shapes can also represent form. Sculpture is the most obvious place to see form or 3-dimensional shape in art. Value refers to relative lightness and darkness of a base color and includes light, medium, and dark areas. Value is perceived in terms of varying level of contrast. Highlights, midtones, shadows, and cast shadows may all show up as different intensities of the same color. Texture refers to the tactile qualities of a surface, actual, or the visual representation of such surface qualities, implied. There are 3 basic types of texture: actual, simulated, and invented. An actual texture comes from real materials that are part of the artwork. simulated texture is the illusion of a real texture, such as painted fabric. Invented textures are created by the artist from imagination. Space is the creation of visual perspective. Perspective visually represents a volume of space or a three-dimensional object on a flat surface. Space is the illusion of depth, the distance around, between, above, below, and within an object or group of objects. This is Gypsy Sleeping by Henri Rousseau, painted in 1897. This oil painting contains visual representations of all 7 elements of art. Rousseau uses a great deal of line in this work. The lines in the cloth, delicate strings of the instrument, and the woman's hair are examples. Her colorful garment contains a rainbow of spectrum of hues. Rousseau creates a great deal of interest with this range of values and intensities. The smooth circle-shaped moon is in stark contrast within the rectangular expanse that it occupies, appearing like a hole punched out of the sky. The forms in the painting have a flatness to their dimension. The feet here almost appear to sink a little into the sand. Rousseau's use of this flattened form gives the painting a dreamlike quality. Here we can see a wonderful use of value to give some illusion of space or perspective. The values of blue in the water or the browns in the sand, for example, gradually change from dark to medium to light. The lion's hairy mane is expressed with texture through flowing line. This is an example of an invented texture because it is a stylistic depiction of an actual hairy texture. One can see the expression of space in the entire image. Rousseau's flattened, layered shapes create a foreshortened space, a lack of depth, of little space between objects. Only the stars and mountains appear distant, while the eye is drawn closer and closer to the lion's face and the gypsy. Rousseau's repetitive use of parallel lines, shapes, circles in this case, and smooth value transitions work together with the stylized, textured, and flattened dimensions to create the entrancing quality of Gypsy Sleeping.
In the next few slides, we're going to explore each element in detail. We will define the element, watch a short clip, and take a few minutes to practice each element on our own. A line is an element of art defined by a point moving in space. Lines may be 2- or 3-dimensional, descriptive, implied, or abstract.
Each of these pictures is a self-portrait by a well-known artist. Although they are portraying very similar things, one main idea that differentiates them is how the artists have used line in their work. Line is one of the 7 elements of art, along with shape, color, texture, form, value, and space. These 7 elements are the building blocks of all art and are a great place to start when analyzing or interpreting works of art. Line is the path created when an object moves from one point to another. In the visual arts, lines are made when you draw or paint marks on a paper or canvas, or when materials such as wood, glass, and metal are bent or shaped. Lines are also made by photographers and filmmakers when they choose how to angle their cameras and how to compose their shots. Lines can be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, straight, curved, or free form. They can be thick or thin, light or dark. Sometimes one line can be all of those things. Lines can be described in many ways: dashed, dotted, rough, smooth, zigzag, implied? What qualities do you see in these lines? How would you describe them? Every artist has a unique way of making lines. It's one way of expressing their individual style. This is a self-portrait by Jean-Michel Basquiat. His lines might be described as bold, jagged, almost messy at times. What do these lines make you think of? Why might he have chosen to represent himself in this way? Compare that to the faint, seemingly unfinished quality of this self-portrait by David Hockney. What do his lines suggest to you? Do they make you think or feel differently than the Basquiat self-portrait? If you were drawing a self-portrait, what kinds of lines would you choose to represent yourself? What kinds of lines would communicate the messages you want viewers to think about? The next time you are looking at a sculpture, painting, or drawing, try to notice what kinds of lines are used and interpret what they mean to you.
Here are some examples of lines. So you can see some broken lines, some curly, wavy ones, some vertical, some straight, some diagonal, lots of different lines. Now it's your turn. Take a few minutes to work on drawing some lines. Shape is an element of art that is two-dimensional, flat, or limited to height and width.
Fruit has played a prominent role in the history of art. It's long been a favorite subject for artists making still life paintings and drawings. Looking at still lifes of fruit is a useful way of studying how artists approach making shapes. Shape is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, form, texture, value, space, and color. When the beginning of a line connects with its own end or intersects with another, a shape is formed. In visual art, shapes are flat and are defined by their length and width. In other words, they're two-dimensional. There is an infinite number of shapes, but all fall into one of 2 categories: geometric, or organic. Geometric shapes are commonly recognized such as squares, hexagons, rectangles, and circles. Organic shapes are free-form and often one of a kind. Artists learn how to see the world around them as basic shapes. Simplifying objects into geometric and organic shapes makes drawing them easier. Shapes inherit the qualities of the lines that were used to construct them. For instance, this painting by Cezanne has heavy, solid outlines that define the shapes, whereas the fruit in this ink drawing by Manoel Araki is made up of very soft, fuzzy lines. Each approach to making lines produces different feelings and associations in the viewers. Some artists make oranges that are perfectly round, while others draw or paint every little bump and detail of the skin. The next time you're looking at a painting or drawing, try to notice how the artist is using shape in their work. If you were making a drawing or painting, how would you interpret the objects in front of you? Would you draw them as faithfully as possible? Or would you choose to represent them more abstractly? Practice for yourself by setting up a bowl of fruit and drawing what you see.
Now we're going to talk about shapes, and here's an example of shapes and forms together. However, we're going to go first into shapes, and in the next slide we'll go on to forms. So shapes are geometric, and they're usually flat or two-dimensional. So you're going to see on this slide, you're going to see some circles, some triangles, some squares, rectangles. Okay, now it's your turn. You're going to take the next few minutes and you're going to work on drawing some shapes. Remember, like in the last slide we just talked about, shapes are flat and two-dimensional, and you can draw some squares, some circles, some triangles, whichever shape you prefer to practice. Form is an element of art that is three-dimensional and encloses volume. It includes height, width, and depth, as in a cube, a sphere, a pyramid, or a cylinder. Form may also be free-flowing.
These paintings are all examples of the genre of art called trompe-l'oeil. Translated from French, trompe-l'oeil literally means fools the eye. It's a style of art that makes you question if what you're seeing is real. It's this illusion of depth that artists create, which tricks our eyes. When shapes get this third dimension of depth, they become forms. Form is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, texture, value, space, and color. When given form, circles become spheres, squares become cubes, triangles become cones or pyramids. Form takes up space in either a real or implied way. In paintings and drawings, for instance, form is implied because it's an illusion of 3 dimensions. With sculpture, on the other hand, form is real because it takes up 3-dimensional space. Visual artists use light and shadow effects to create the illusion of 3-dimensional form. A strong sense of form can also be created by increasing contrast between highlights and shadow areas. Street artist Banksy uses this technique a lot. Notice how these human forms are made up of only white, black, and 1 shade of gray. Sometimes form can even be created by an artist's use of color. Artist Akash Nihalani often juxtaposes brightly colored forms against neutral backgrounds to create the illusion of depth. Notice his forms don't incorporate any shading at all. These are just a few ways artists create forms and incorporate depth into their work. What are some other ways that artists create form? Is there a particular style or technique that draws you in and catches your eye? Mastering many different approaches to making form will give you unlimited options when creating your own artwork, and will enable you to fool viewers' eyes in any way you choose.
Okay, we're going to continue on this slide talking about form. So form can be organic, free form, or natural. Form can also be 3-dimensional, so like your spheres, your pyramids, your cubes. Okay, now it's your turn. You're going to take the next few minutes to work on form. Again, remember that form is 3-dimensional, so you can work on cubes, cones, spheres, pyramids. Color is an element of art made up of 3 properties: the hue, the name of a color; the value, the hue's lightness and darkness. Remember, a color's value changes when white or black is added; and intensity, which is the quality of brightness and purity. High intensity means a color is strong and bright, and low intensity means a color is faint and dull.
A lot of representational art attempts to portray the world realistically by mimicking 3-dimensional space and attempting to faithfully render objects as we see them. However, many artists embrace a different reality. So-called color field painters of the 1950s and 60s wanted to reinforce the idea that the painted canvas is a flat, 2-dimensional space. They made enormous, large-scale paintings that were often comprised of just 1 or 2 colors. Their art didn't represent the outside world or try to take you to another place. It reinforced the fact that you're looking at a painting. The bold, bright colors they used weren't meant to represent anything else. For them and the many artists they inspired, color is a beautiful and worthy subject all its own. Color is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, form, texture, value, and space. When light hits an object, some of it is absorbed and some of it is reflected, depending on the materials the object is made of. The light that is reflected off of the object is what we see as an object's color. Red, yellow, and blue are called primary colors because they cannot be made from the mixing of other colors. However, the three primary colors can be mixed together to produce nearly every other hue imaginable. Green, orange, and violet are the three secondary colors. They are created by mixing two of the primary colors together in equal amounts. When you mix a primary color with a secondary color, you get a tertiary color, such as red-orange, blue-green. Every individual color can be altered by changing its value through tinting, shading, and toning. Tint is simply any color with white added to it. So red becomes pink, blue becomes light blue, green becomes light green, and so on. A shade, then, is created by adding black to any color. Adding black and white to a color produces a tone. Sometimes a work of art will be made up of the tints, shades, and tones of only one color. This is what we call a monochromatic color scheme. One way artists personalize their work is by creating their own very unique colors, tints, shades, and tones. Notice how the violet colors in this print by Anish Kapoor differ from the ones used by painter Morris Louis. Is there one that has more tinting or shading than another? What do you think is creating the difference? One common way people categorize colors is by temperature. Reds, oranges, and yellows are referred to as warm because they can be easily associated with a warm, sunny day. Blues, violets, and greens, on the other hand, are called cool because they often come to mind when thinking about overcast or rainy days. When cool and warm colors are mixed together in a painting, what is the overall mood or feeling then? Besides the weather, there are many other associations and feelings that colors can summon. Is there a color or combination of colors that triggers a specific memory or thought in you? Understanding the effects colors have on you will help you read an artwork and develop your own interpretation of it. And when making your own artwork, knowing the effect colors have will help you control the messages you hope to convey.
Okay, here's an example of color, and it's going to take us back to lesson 1. If you remember, we talked about the color wheel, primary colors, secondary colors. So here is your example of color as an element of art. You guessed it, now it's your turn. Take the next few minutes to work on using colors. Remember, you can mix colors or add black or white to lighten or darken your colors. You can use as many colors as you like or as little as you like. Have fun! Value is the lightness or darkness of tones or colors. White is the lightest value and black is the darkest. The value halfway between these extremes is called middle gray.
The word photograph comes from two Greek words that translate to light drawing. Some people describe photography then as drawing with light. Light defines objects and literally enables us to see things. Artists create the illusion of light by being able to produce a wide range of tonal and color values. Value is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, form, texture, color, and space. Value is how light or dark a given color or hue is. Values can be better understood when they are visualized as a scale or a gradient. Here's the value scale for this gray tone. It ranges from pure white to absolute black, with a number of gray tones in between. Any hue or tone has a similar scale from dark to light. Different values are created by lightening the hue. in this case adding white to it, or by darkening it with black. When an artwork has many tones in between black and white, it is considered low contrast. For instance, in this photograph by Nicholas Nixon, notice how many different shades of gray there are. A high contrast image, on the other hand, would have very few tonal values between black and white, like this photograph by Kenneth Josephson. The texture of an object's surface can play a role in how we see value. In this photograph by Brett Weston, notice how the veins in the leaves of lettuce create areas of dramatic contrast between light and dark. Compare that with this photograph of bananas, also by Weston. The skin of the bananas dulls the light, which gives the photograph much less contrast. The different ways artists create lines and implied textures can also affect how we perceive value. Notice how heavy and dark the blacks are in this charcoal drawing. Also notice how certain areas smoothly transition from dark to light. This watercolor painting's blacks aren't nearly as dark. Notice too how the shading isn't as smoothly blended. The next time you are looking at a photograph, painting, or drawing, try to notice how the artist is rendering value. And when you're creating your own artwork, practice creating value scales with a variety of different mediums and hues, so your artwork shines in its own unique way.
Here's an example of value. So value is going to be the range of a color from light to dark. Now it's your turn. You're going to take the next few minutes to work on using value. Remember, you can add more pressure or take off pressure from your color pencil, or crayon to make your image lighter or darker. Texture is an element of art that refers to the way things feel or look as if they might feel if they were touched.
We tend to think of art as something just to look at, but a lot of artists make their work to stimulate our other senses. Sculptors, textile and fabric artists, bookmakers, ceramicists, and artists working in many other forms think a lot about how to engage viewers' sense of touch. Even when their art is not meant to be touched, artists put a lot of thought and work into creating many different textures. Texture is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, color, form, value, and space. Texture is the look or feel of a surface. Just like form, texture can be real or implied. If you were to run your hand across this sculpture by Alberto Giacometti, you would feel the hardness of the bronze metal and the roughness of the form that Giacometti created. This is called actual texture. Implied textures are only visual. They can't be felt. For instance, if you could touch the canvas of this self-portrait by Chuck Close, you wouldn't feel the varied textures of skin and hair. You would feel the smoothness of the oil paint. So these textures are implied because we can only see them. There are countless ways that artists create implied textures. How many different kinds of lines do you notice in this painting by Roy DeForest? You have the zigzag lines creating the woman's hair on the left, cross-hatching creating her skin, the blurred, smudged colors coming out of the dog's mouth and the man's mouth in the center. Those are just to name a few kinds of implied textures here. Textures can also be created through use of shapes. In this painting by Gustav Klimt, notice how he repeats shapes to create textures. You have the triangles and lines on the woman's dress on the left, the many spirals creating the tree in the center, And in the woman's dress on the right, you have circles within circles, rectangles within squares, and all the scattered shapes throughout the piece create many different textures. Paintings and other typically two-dimensional art can have actual texture. Sometimes artists layer paint on the canvas so thick that it becomes three-dimensional. At that point, the paint is a sculptural element that can be manipulated and shaped. Some artists build up fabrics, textiles, jewelry, and many other objects on the canvas to create additional textures. Artists often feature the natural textures of the materials they use, or textures uniquely created and formed by hand. Whatever the approach, textures are an expressive tool artists use to reinforce their overall messages. The next time you're making a painting, drawing, collage, or sculpture, find a way to incorporate textures that say something relevant and important to you.
Here's an example of texture. So texture is going to help us create the illusion of how something might look or feel. So if you look at something with jagged edges, it might be giving you the illusion that it's sharp or jagged, uneven. Now it's your turn. Take the next few minutes to work on using texture. Remember, you can always add texture to give images the illusion of how something may look or feel. For example, you can draw jagged lines to give the illusion that something is sharp or uneven. Space refers to an element of art by which positive and negative areas are defined or a sense of depth is achieved in a work of art.
Space is always part of an artwork, sometimes in multiple ways. No art form demonstrates this more than site-specific work. Site-specific art is designed exclusively for one particular space. For this type of art, it's impossible to isolate the work from its surrounding environment. So for many artists then, space and how to transform it is the artwork. Space is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, form, texture, value, and color. Space is the area in which an artwork is organized. It encompasses the area within a work of art and can also include the area immediately outside of and around a work of art. In paintings, drawings, and other two-dimensional work, the space of an artwork is usually contained within the borders of the paper or canvas it's made on. The main objects in a work of art take up positive space. The area around them then is called negative space. Sometimes artists intentionally try to blur the boundaries between positive and negative space. In sculpture and other three-dimensional arts, positive space is the area the objects actually occupy, and negative space is all the other areas between and around the objects. Many two-dimensional works create the illusion of three-dimensional space by using some very specific techniques. Notice how painter Kehinde Wiley overlaps some of the background pattern onto the front of people in these portraits. This overlapping gives a sense of three-dimensional space. Landscape painter Wang Hui placed objects in different parts of the canvas to imply three-dimensional space. Notice how figures towards the top of the paintings seem to be moving further back in space, even though they are roughly the same size. Some artists do use relative size to give their work the illusion of real space. The smaller human figures in these paintings by Ben Shahn seem to be more distant and further away from the larger ones. Roy de Carava often contrasted sharply focused figures with blurry, soft backgrounds in his photographs. Such a contrast in detail gives the sense of lush, real depth. Varying hues and values will also give two-dimensional works the illusion of real space. See how painter Georgia O'Keeffe uses a variety of red values and imbues her work with a feeling of true depth? Painter Alex Roulette uses classic single and two-point perspective in his work to create the impression of deep, expansive space. Notice too how objects get smaller in order to seem more distant from each other. Some other ways to describe how artists use space are dense, open, cluttered, symmetrical, shallow, flat. How would you describe the way artists approach space in these works? What qualities do you see? How artists use space is one way they are able to create a unique style and reinforce the messages they hope to communicate. The next time you're looking at a painting, photograph, or sculpture, try to notice how the artist is using space in their work. And when you're making your own artwork, try to develop an approach to space that resonates with other ideas you're trying to communicate. That way, your messages will surely travel far and wide.
Here's an example of space. So it shows us how shapes are arranged in artwork to create a sense of space. So think about how things can be arranged on your artwork to make them seem near or far from you. Now it's your turn. Take the next few minutes to work on using space. Remember, you can draw images bigger or smaller or at an angle to give the impression that the image is near or far. Now that we're familiar with the elements of art, let's use our imagination, creativity, and knowledge to create beautiful artwork incorporating all of the elements of art. Take the next 30 minutes to select and complete an activity of your choice. Option 1 of your activities is an Elements of Art worksheet. So you can apply your knowledge and practice using the different elements of art by using one of the sheets provided on your resources slide. The materials for this activity are the Elements of Art worksheets and crayons, markers, color pencils, or paint, whatever you have on hand at home. Your second activity is to incorporate the elements of art in any art piece that you'd like. So you can create an art piece by applying your knowledge and using your creativity to incorporate as many of the elements as you please. Okay, your materials for this activity are going to be paper, pencil, crayons, markers, color pencils, or paint, whatever you have on hand or whatever medium you prefer. Okay, your third and final option is to watch suggested video. So the video